I have with me, is he a pastor, James? But you don't have Pastor Ken Wytsma. Pastor Ken Wytsma is with me. He is lead pastor of Antioch Church and president of Kilns College in Bend, Oregon. He is founder of the Justice Conference and author of newly released book, The Grand Paradox, The Messiness of Life, The Mystery of God, and the Necessity of Faith. We're going to get to all that today. He wrote an article in Relevant magazine titled, Want to Hear from God? Slow Down. Pastor Ken, welcome to the show, sir. Thanks for coming on.
I appreciate you having me.
Very interesting article. I want and I also want to ask you a few things about your book. You write deadlines, relational drama, global injustice, multiple jobs, financial stress. Those things are noise that cause pressure on you that distract from God's voice. Give us an example of what God's voice has led you to do.
Well, I was an engineering student at Clemson when, at age 22, I became a Christian, and I had no intentions whatsoever of being a pastor or going into ministry. So I'll just grab one of the first things, but kind of pitching all of that and going a whole different direction and heading towards ministry was probably one of the biggest examples of just God leading me in a direction I wouldn't have gone, and it over the course of 6 months, 8 months, became very clear to me that this was kind of this direction that God was pushing me or pulling me, and I was scared to death about doing it. And I began to realize it was a faith thing for me, that I had to, in some sense, trust God that would be okay, that He had control of my life, and that even though being a pastor wasn't what I dreamed of becoming, that's what I was supposed to do in obedience. And so once I made that decision, it was funny, and I think it's like this a lot of times with God. We're never as scared about a step of faith as right before we take it, but oftentimes when we take that step of faith, we turn back and go, wow, this is exactly, in some ways, what I would have wanted to do all along, or what I was maybe made to do, but I had to do it in faith. So there's an example of at least one thing in my life.
You write about global injustice. What is global injustice?
Well, in the age of globalization, it's an amazing thing that we can take in so much information from around the planet almost simultaneously. You know, if you go back several hundred years, what would have taken weeks or months, or maybe even a year for news from one country to travel to another, you just don't take in the same kind of information all at once like you do now. And so when you look at issues, say, poverty or sex trafficking or other things, and you're able to see instances of that in that category happening in countries simultaneously all around the world, and being aware of that, it's what I mean by kind of a heightened sense of global injustice, injustice that's happening against certain people groups or based on certain things, and that we're able to kind of recognize that, evaluate that, and be aware of that kind of all at once.
Do we have a free will?
Yes.
We have a free will. Explain that.
Well, it's been a long time since I've been asked that question. Free will is simply that we could have chosen otherwise.
You say yes, we do have a free will, right?
Yes.
And if we have a free will, let me ask you this, do you ever do things that you don't want to do, and you say to yourself, I would never do that again, you can't believe you did it, and then later down the road, you find yourself doing it again, and you don't believe that you did it again? Has that ever happened to you, or does that happen?
Absolutely.
And so, if you have a free will, why do you do the things you don't want to do?
I think one of the things we struggle with is especially in America, we get the sense that we're inherently good. And I think God's creation is good, and God created men and women to be good. And I think we have that image of God in us. But I think sometimes in trying to serve our appetites or serve our stomach, as Paul said, our God is our stomach, or their God is their appetites, that we really get pulled thinking that somehow the things we're going to do that feel like they're going to bring us pleasure or meaning or significance are really going to deliver on that. And then we eat the fruit on those things. And sometimes even when we eat the fruit and realize that it was just a mirage, what we thought was going to fulfill us didn't fulfill us, we can even go back to that time and again, believing that it will. And I think that's the life of faith, even though none of us is going to live it perfectly. The life of faith is choosing kind of the upside-down logic of God's kingdom, that we don't always choose to do the things that might seem right or feel right in the moment, but we choose the things that are right.
But if you're thinking that you're doing something that is right because of whatever reason, aren't you being influenced by something that is giving you a false impression that this is going to turn out well? And so from that influence, you're doing what you wouldn't ordinarily do?
I think you're being persuaded or being pulled or enticed.
Right.
And I think it's what we see in the garden,
So if you're being persuaded, isn't that controlling you to make you do what you wouldn't ordinarily do or don't want to do?
That what is controlling?
If something is persuading you to do it, isn't that something controlling you?
Well, there's varying degrees of control. So I think that control isn't an either-or thing. We're being controlled or not controlled. But when something's persuading or influencing us, it's a degreed property. So something can really measure a whole lot of influence on me. 90-something% or whatnot, if I'm an addict or if there are other forces involved. But at the end of the day, what free will says is that not everything I do is controlled by forces outside of my choice. That even if only on some choices or even if only some percentage on some choices I have freedom, then I still could have chosen otherwise.
So if you have a free will, why don't you choose every time not to be influenced and go along with the influence if it's an evil influence or negative or whatever?
Well, I got a great book for that. It's called The Grand Paradox. Yeah, I think the life of faith is the counter-narrative, that somehow that illogical or foggy, when you picture closing your eyes and stumbling forward and groping for something to hold on to, that's what faith is. It's the opposite of walking by sight. And that to do that, it's really a choice that says, I'm not going to choose the things that pull at me that might seem logical or like they make sense. Instead, I'm going to live by faith. And so faith really is the counter-narrative of what it means to live, trying to live at least into God's righteousness.
So, if I'm reading you right or hearing you right, you're saying that we really don't have a free will. Because if you had a free will, you would be free 100% of the time.
No, I don't think that holds. I think having a free will means that it's present, whether it's present in every decision or to what degree it's present in every decision, doesn't matter. If it's there one time, then that means I have it. If everything in this world is deterministic, then there's never a time in which I have freedom. So, we can go to the philosophy classroom and argue about how much freedom we have, or various persons, do they have different degrees of freedom? But once freedom is there, it's there. We have free will, regardless of what percentage it's there.
I say that we don't have a free will. I say that there are things that we as human beings do that we know is wrong, and you know it's wrong even before you do it, but something else has made a home in you, and it is driving you to do it. And because you won't acknowledge that it's not you, it's something else, people tend to deceive themselves and say, well, I do have a free will. I do, because the ego wants you to believe that you have a free will, and it's hard for people to admit that they don't. even though they know they're doing things that they don't want to do, and they repeat it even after saying they would never do it again. My question to you: are you concerned that if people knew they have a free will, that they don't have a free will, that they would not take responsibility for doing wrong?
Well, I know that that's one of the outcomes. I mean, if we could not do otherwise, then accountability or culpability goes out the window. So this famous court case by Clarence Darrow, who argued the side of evolution in the monkey trial, the Scopes trial back in the 20s, and he defended two murder suspects in Chicago and used that defense, deterministic defense, that there is no free will, and so these two gentlemen that committed this murder could not have done otherwise, and therefore they shouldn't be held accountable or responsible. So our whole notion of responsibility or holding people accountable for actions is in some sense owing to the fact that we believe people have choices or could do otherwise. Now that doesn't go to minimize the effect of the flesh or the devil, as Paul would talk about in the book of Timothy, and certainly the flesh and these things weigh heavily on us and can suck us into things that maybe we, on reflection, wish we hadn't gotten sucked into. But I think the notion that we can choose to love or not to love, or choose to do right by our neighbor or not do right by our neighbor, speaks to the idea that there is the freedom to choose, and that we're not only encouraged, but according to the Bible, we're disciplined by God to choose to do what is right.
Well, one thing I realize is that, in realizing that you don't have a free will, it doesn't mean you don't take responsibility, because the moment you can acknowledge that what this thing is causing you to do is wrong, that's when you take control over this other identity that's made a home in you. You take control over that, and it can no longer make you do or cause you to do the things that you don't want to do. So you take responsibility, and in that responsibility, that's where freedom is, where it can't control you to cause you to do the things you don't want to do.
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. I think we're using free will differently, because you saying in that moment you realize and you take control. All of that to me is language of free will, that you have the ability to see something, to recognize something, to be chastised by something, to choose an alternative, to allow something to work in your life, discipline, responsibility to kind of lean into those things. So I think we're saying the same thing. Maybe there's just different terminology, and you're using free will to kind of get at something.
Pastor, tell the folks how to get your book, and then I have a couple more questions for you.
Sure, you can get the book on Amazon or wherever books are sold. It's The Grand Paradox, and you can also find me online at kenwytsma.com, KenWytsma.com. There's small group resources, parent resources for the book, and I'd love to connect with people that way.
You often use the phrase theology of justice. What is theology of justice?
Yeah, theology of justice, the last 100 years in America, we had that interesting thing where, to make a gross generalization, the liberal side of the church kind of took a little bit more of the language of love or justice, and the conservative side of the church took a little bit more theology, doctrine, proclamation of Jesus. And I think that what I'm trying to do is to say that if we really understand Scripture correctly, if we really value the doctrine and whatnot, then our understanding of God is going to compel our love of neighbor. And so what we find is when we study God, we learn a lot about justice, and when we study justice, we learn a lot about God. And so trying to just bring back that strong biblical mandate, command, that we be a part of the work of reconciliation. And the work of reconciliation extends to, obviously, the foreigner, the orphan, the widow, in trying to bring about a just society.
You're not a social justice guy, are you?
The way you mean it, no. So I don't mind the phrase social justice, but I define it differently than what happens in political debates. criminal justice, international justice. There's a lot of different slices of the pie that we can come up with. Criminal justice is what justice looks like when we're talking about law and order. International justice is what it looks like between two sovereign nations. When I say social justice, I'm simply meaning justice in the social arena that looks like orphans and widows and love of neighbor and those kinds of things. I think the strategy or the programs that people on different sides enact to bring about social justice, those are things that we can debate in terms of efficacy, in terms of long-term or short-term benefits. But the idea that there should be a just society or justice in society is something that's biblical. If justice matters to God, then it matters in all sectors of society.
Do you support same-sex marriage?
That's a very complicated question that I've never tackled in a public setting, so I'll have to take that one offline.
Why is that so complicated?
It's like the abortion debates of 10, 20 years ago that whoever's coming to that conversation is coming with some very firm, entrenched thoughts, looking for certain words or buzz phrases. And so to have a deep or nuanced conversation on some of those topics is very hard because they're so polarized.
Well, it should not be. You represent God. You're the man of the cloth, and you know right from wrong. And God will want you to keep it simple so you can direct the lost back to Him. Yeah, and so absolutely. I would think that you would be straightforward about that. Being
straightforward is different publicly versus privately, where you can sit with somebody and have a conversation back and forth and extend that conversation with all of its nuance and do it in a way that honors the other.
But it sounds like you're rather talking private with a person because you're afraid to let it be known that you stand for truth.
No, I stand for truth. I've got a website, askquestions.tv, that has 2,000 videos of me answering any and all questions. So answering questions and trying to think deeply about things that matter from a biblical perspective is something that I've never shied away from.
Do you support abortion?
No.
You don't support abortion?
No.
But you're not sure if you support same-sex marriage?
Well, I know that it's a complicated topic, and I know where I stand on it.
Where do you stand?
I'm not going to say that publicly.
Well, why not? You just said no to abortion. Why not no to same-sex marriage?
Because it's something that I feel like I'm not supposed to talk on publicly, and so.
But you're letting Satan. You're letting Satan keep.
You can call me back in a half hour, and we can have a great conversation.
But I want it for my audience too. There are some people out there who are confused about it, and by you being a man of God, you can help clear that up.
I could, but I think it would take longer than what we have time for.
I'll give you an extra hour. Go ahead.
No, I'll pass on it. How's that?
Let me ask, in your book, your wife is quoted in a few places online as saying, "The Grand Paradox is a book for women and mothers. They need to read it." Can you explain that?
Yeah, we've got 4 daughters. So my wife Tamara and I, we have 4 kids, 4 girls.
So you have no boys at all?
I have no boys. I have 4 daughters.
Why is it that men are not making boys anymore? Are they that weak?
I hope that has nothing to do with the genetics of it.
In the good old days, when boys were boys and men were men, men made boys first.
I guess I don't know how that works then, but I tell you what, I love my daughters, and it's a joy to have them, and their ages 6 all the way up to 13. But so my wife is kind of in the tunnel of all that, and she read the Grand Paradox several times through, and as it was kind of going to print. So she's read it about as much as anyone, and she just really came to the conviction that a lot of the things she hears from mothers, from women, kind of just the challenges in life and struggling to find what does it mean to have faith in the midst of this, that she just really didn't feel like there was a lot of answers or a lot of guidance for that. And that's really what this book talks about. And so she really thought, wow, somehow we got to get this into the hands of mothers or women. The title of the book, The Messiness of Life, The Mystery of God, it's not meant to be austere in any way. It's simply that if we take the Bible seriously, life is messy. And we have this illusion that whenever we get over the next hill or through the next trial, or if we can just beat cancer this time, that somehow we're going to get to that point in life where it's not messy.
Yeah.
That season where it's not messy. And the reality is it's relentlessly difficult, and we think God should be a little more clear, a little more often than he is. But like Isaiah says, his ways are higher than our ways, and we find that God is a little bit more mysterious than what we wish he was. So between life being messy and God being mysterious, we really need a deep conversation about faith.
I want the good old days back when men made boys first. When boys were boys and men were men. Where is that? We're losing our country because of it. I'm talking with my final segment with Pastor Ken Wytsma. And his book is The Grand Paradox. We're going to tell you again how to get that book. Andre, you say you pray you have a boy first? If you don't, I'm not going to let you live it down. You better have a boy first. Oh, Jesus.
I love her dearly.
Pastor, let me ask, and then I'm going straight to the call. The Daily Mail is reporting that white U.S. children will be minority by 2020 after immigrant baby boom, and it says by 2020, 50.2% of children will be minority. Are you as concerned about that as I am?
Well, I know the statistic and I know the trends, but to me, all people are made in the image of God. And so whatever color or variation of color they are, I think they're made in the image of God. The beauty of this country is that we can come here and hopefully find a constitution that protects equality, protects the dignity, the inalienable rights of all those people.
But they're not doing it. That sounds cute, but in reality, when you look around, the people who are coming across the borders, they're coming from ghettos, and they come into our country and create ghettos. And sure. If you look at the blacks, for the most part, they're only creating ghettos and violent children. And if white people become the minority in this country, America would become a ghetto. Does that concern you?
Well, I don't know that logic. I would want to go and say that make those sweeping generalizations.
Show me where I'm not wrong. Show me a city or a state where black people are in control or Hispanics, and you want to go live there.
Well, I just don't like generalizing the whole people group.
Well, I said not all, but most.
All right. It's not all. Yeah, so the thing for me is obviously we need to care about immigration reform so that, because both parties, Republicans and Democrats, know that it needs to be reformed. Obviously, there's debates on how to reform it, but we need to. So you agree that
they need to shut the border down and stop the illegals from coming in?
Well, yeah, you can't control the flow or the nature of how something's going if you don't have control of it. So if you're going to reform it, you're implying that you're going to try and have control to bring about good results. And shutting down the border, having tight border security is obviously a part of that, especially if you talk to people that live near the border. Yeah. So yeah, that would be a part of it. But
they need to enforce the law, not they're not enforcing the laws.
They're not. And so
it's amazing how strong you are on abortion and illegal alien situation, but you're scared on the homosexual same-sex marriage situation.
I just I wasn't going to answer that question, but yeah, I'm obviously a conservative, and I think if you're talking about where the races are going and where the percentages are going, I think there's a deeper issue of education. I've heard some of your commercials in between that obviously we have to be able to raise up children to become mature adults, both men and women, And so obviously there's a whole multifaceted approach that needs to be working here.
Let me go out to Memphis real fast here. I'm looking at the clock and talk to Keith. Keith, thanks for calling. Thanks for holding you on with Pastor Wytsma.
Yeah, I think your guest needs to comprehend a basic truth, which is that liberalism is the modern face of evil. You can't have liberal Christianity. Liberal Christianity is an oxymoron. It'd be like holy sin. You can't have holy sin, and you can't have liberal Christianity. Homosexuality, the way I resolve it is this. You can't approve what God condemns, and you cannot condemn what God approves. If you were an atheist, liberal, Marxist, and you looked at the church, what would you make of it? You'd say, well, what they believe is a bunch of baloney, but they sure do have a lot of expensive real estate, and they seem to have a lot of influence and wealth. Let's infiltrate their ranks and turn them into an engine to promote the revolution. And I submit to you that's exactly what's happened over the past 70 years in America.
Let's get
for example,
response.
Homosexuality is never mentioned anywhere in the Bible or in the sacred scriptures of any major religion without being coupled with the strongest disapprobation possible. It's not only a sin in the Bible, it's an abomination. That's like a supersized sin. And that doesn't mean you hate homosexuals.
Right.
The Bible says God wishes not the death of a sinner, but rather that he may turn from his wickedness and live.
That's deep. Let me get a because of time, Keith. Pastor, go ahead.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't disagree with anyone that says that the backbone of the church, or even kind of living up to the church's standards is something that we're doing really well. But I trust God's sovereignty. I look back at history in the 1200s, 1300s.
What do you say to what Keith had to say about the homosexuality in the Bible?
Well, what I'm saying, I didn't come to debate the political issue. I wanted to talk about faith. But if we're talking about the church and the history of the church, there's often long 100-year periods where we haven't lived up to our best selves, and I certainly think that God can preserve the church. He always has preserved the church. He's always preserved a remnant, and he'll always be able to, I think...
Pastor, I'm out of time here. Thank you so much, sir, for being on with me. Pastor Wytsma?
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Back in a moment, folks.